Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Made to Parade podcast. And I'm your host, Sarah Carlisle. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Kenny Cromie from Star of Down Maghera. Lovely to see you, Kenny.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Great to be here.
So the band this year is celebrating their 50th anniversary. That is a huge milestone. How are you feeling about that?
Oh, we're really over the moon. We're glad we've made the 50th, and it's been a really fantastic year.
And if you'll forgive me for giving our viewers a wee clue to your age, Kenny, you've been around from the very beginning of the band.
I was exceptionally young when I joined the band, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yes, I've been there from the start. Yep.
So how does a band come together? How does a band just appear out of thin air? What's the process there?
There has been a band in Maghera for a very long time. So with records of the band in the late 1800s. So the band accompanied the local Orange district to parades in the local churches. And then in the early part of the 1900s, it took part in the Covenant parades, and it's developed from there. We had a band, it was called Maghera Flute Band, and it was more of a melody type flute band in those days. And we have an old photograph from about 1912, and it shows the band outside the Orange Hall. Quite a big band at the time. The unique thing about it is it's obviously black and white. They're all in their black suits, white shirts and black ties. But the real standout thing is the hats they're wearing. And they're wearing what I would call a slowy hat. So that's the hats that the Australian Imperial Force wore. So where they got them, we've no idea, but it was really unique to the time.
So there's a long, long history then?
An absolutely long.
In Maghera?
Yep, a real long history. Like most bands, I'm sure in those days, the band would have consisted mainly of lodge members and their immediate families. So it's a quite rural area on the outskirts of Newcastle, and that's where it mainly consisted of, you know.
Amazing. So 50 years ago then, the shift to what we now know as Star of Maghera, Star of Down Maghera.
Star of Down, yes, the Star of Down. The Star of Down came from a few of us getting together at band practice, and we thought about various different names. Not sure who came up with the name, but we ended up with the Star of Down. The band came and was formed, I say it was always a sort of melody type band. We were called quite young at the time, and what we are now terming the Blood and Thunder type bands were just starting on the rise. And most towns, big towns in particular, had a Blood and Thunder flute band. Belfast in particular had a lot of them. And I can remember my father was very heavily involved in the Loyal Orders. And I can remember me and my younger brother accompanying him to a parade. I'm nearly sure it was an Easter Monday parade in Carlisle. And we went along and we accompanied my father as he walked with the lodge. And I remember seeing two standout bands at that time. And that would have been probably around the early 70s. And it was the Loyal Sons of Baina from Newry, who are still going strong, and Toy Flute Band from Carlisle. And I can remember seeing the vigour and the enthusiasm of the Blood and Thunder bands, and that must have sparked something in my head. And so we came back and had a couple of very good friends in Newcastle who lived quite close to where we lived, Michael and Christopher Calvert, and they had a friend called Jeffrey Carlisle who were in the original band and who had designs on moving the band forward. Unfortunately, some of the senior members in the band had other feelings, you know. And Christopher Calvert was the first person that took on the bass drum job. And the older members had the idea that Chris would be using the single stick and he'd be having a single beat. We had different ideas, you know. And during practice, we would have experimented with different types of bass drum play and side drum play. So I become a side drummer. My younger brother, he done the pole. So the first 12th of July as a unit we went to was in Cumber. And we were on our way to, just before we left the Orange Hall. A few nights before we'd been practicing. Chris had two bass drum sticks. And we were practicing the way we thought we wanted things to develop. And we arrived on the 12th morning. And lo and behold, there was only one bass drum stick. One had miraculously disappeared. We're not sure where it went, but we had a good idea. But we went to Cumber on the bus, and at the early part of the parade, Chris got a little bit overexcited with the one bass drum stick, and one or two of the older members took exception to that. And there was a slight bit of a disagreement, and let's say that was the early days of the band. Once the 12th of July was over, we reformed ourselves at band practice, and we were able to encourage a lot of younger members into the band. And within a few years, we had a band that consisted of over 50 members.
Wow. So quite rebellious roots.
Quite rebellious roots, yes. Chris Calvert and Michael were obviously the mainstays, along with Jeffrey Carlisle. And they had real close connections with the Presbyterian Church in Newcastle. We all went to the high school in Castlewellan, Boys Brigade, the likes of that. So we were able to encourage a lot of people in, and a lot of young fellas all joined, all our mates. And before we knew it, as I said, we're well over 50 members from the surrounding area. Amazing when you think of the size of the village, you know. We're only, a mile and a half outside Newcastle. For those that don't know where Maghera is, we often get confused with Maghera and County Londonderry. Oh. And quite often in the early days we were parading, and bands would have said, look at that, or spectators would have said, look at that band the whole way there from County Londonderry, you know. Little did they know we're only up the road.
You're getting a wee bit too much credit, were you?
A little bit too much credit, yep.
So what sticks in your mind then, early memories of the band? Do you remember what your first parade was?
I can't remember the first parade, you know, but on those days, it was a totally different parade calendar than it is now. Okay. We weren't associated with a black preceptory, so we had an orange lodge. In fact, you know, was basically a lodge band. So we'd have started off with parades would have been very, very local. So the likes of Bryansford Village, Castlewellan Town, Newcastle possibly, you know, Drumcaw, all wee small villages, all had wee accordion bands or pipe bands, and those wee local parades, and they were really small, you know. A night out for us, believe it or not, was a trip to Kilkeel. And there was so many, I sort of believe now, when you go to book a bus now, buses are £300 and £400 each. But in those days when we went to Kilkeel, none of us had cars, we were all young. So we went on the bus, Michael would have organised the bus, charged 50p a head, and we actually made money on the bus, you know, in those days. Hard to believe, like, compared to what it is now. But that was a real treat and a day out for us. And our calendar for the band parades started probably around May, June time, and it finished on the first Friday night in August. The Mourne Young Defenders Flute Band was formed in 1976. They started to hold a parade, and that was our last parade of the year, the first Friday night in August. Jump forward 50 years, this year we've done 50 parades.
Oh my goodness.
So it's been a big sea change, and obviously every town, village in the country has a band now.
Mm-hmm. So it was a lot more compact back in the day.
A lot more compact and a lot more localised, you know.
You'd mentioned parading in Newcastle. Obviously the band was formed at the height of the Troubles. Newcastle is a predominantly nationalist community. Could you talk us through maybe some of the challenges that the band faced and the way that they overcame those challenges in working with that local community? Well,
one of the first things that come to mind, obviously we were based out of Maghera Orange Hall, and I say it's just a few miles outside Newcastle, a very, very rural area, very few houses about. So we got our hall burnt to the ground, like, obviously totally destroyed, and that put us out of action for a while, you know. We've had a series of incidents over the years, you know, and there was a really high level of negativity towards the band, you know. We done what we could do. We kept the band going. We tried to progress as long as we could, you know, and kept going. And sometimes when you get a lot of opposition, it helps the band. So more and more people are drawn to the band. One of the big things that I've looked back over the years, you know, the Troubles were in full flow. We were fortunate at the early days of the Troubles down in Newcastle. It took a while, like the Troubles were really happening in Belfast, Londonderry, maybe parts of Armagh, you know, down around the border areas. But it wasn't very long to start to seep down to our area, you know. And in Castlewellan in particular was pretty alive, hotbed for the Troubles, you know. But I'm still very, very thankful for Michael and Chris and Jeffrey that started the band, because they took a lot of us, you know, young fellas under their wing. And in those days, and most bands now are run by a committee, and our own band's now run by a committee. But in those early days, Michael was the committee. Yeah. So whatever Michael said went. If we had notions of going to a parade here or there, Michael said, no, this is where we're going, you know. And everybody listened to him. He was a very steadying figure, you know. So, you know, when you look back over the years, he was a very steadying hand and showed us a good direction. He always, you know, had respect for everybody and taught us respect. You know, yes, we have a different tradition. We're going to parade in places that we may not be the most welcome, but you do what you're doing. You enjoy your own culture and you go home and you don't annoy anybody. And that's the way we've tried to carry the band through over the years. So, you know, it stood us very, very well. Now, we've had big challenges in Newcastle over the years. Obviously, since the sort of 80s, there was a lot of a hotbed around band parades in particular, you know, and parades were starting to get banned and different things, you know. there was opposition, there was protest groups, everything. And we had the same in Newcastle. We had protests organised against the parade. Parades Commission come on board. And they were always happy enough to facilitate the parade. We had to make some changes, obviously. We were very happy to make them. We wanted to avoid the chapel on a Sunday evening in Newcastle. So we always made sure the parade started after that, so people could go freely to the chapel and come out of it and they weren't going to be annoyed by bands. We've had discussions with people, townspeople, significant figures in the town. And then I suppose the big breakthrough come for us was when we were approached to meet the Chamber of Commerce, the local Chamber of Commerce. So we were quite happy to meet the Chamber of Commerce. We met with the Parades Commission, the police, and we had a very, very frank and fruitful meeting with them. And basically it was all publicans that turned up. So most of the normal traders, probably not operating on a Saturday night, wasn't really going to have a negative effect on them. So the publicans come, and most of the publicans would have been from the nationalist community. So they were very supportive of the parade. They didn't want the parade, like they weren't coming with a narrative of stopping the parade. They wanted the parade to be run in such a way that it wouldn't negatively affect their business.
Yeah.
So we were doing all we could to try and accommodate. Obviously, there's still going to be a parade. There's still going to be disruption, but we're trying to minimise it. So we've done things like we agreed that the cut-off point for the parade would be 10 p.m. at night. So we made sure that the last band was off the streets at 10 p.m. or sooner. And I think over the years we've gained a reasonable amount of, respect from most people, and we've tried our very, very best, And the message we've always put out is, and I've portrayed to, people that's coming to our parade, if you're coming to Newcastle to take part in our parade and you're thinking that you're going to be annoying somebody or, throwing your culture up in their face, and my advice to you is stay at home. Don't come to Newcastle. We don't want that type of people at our parade. And, I said before, like, it's really stood us in good stead over the years. And we get, fantastic support from the local area. And, most of a lot of people in around Newcastle, middle class, and they're happy to see the parade going ahead as long as there's no negative impact to the businesses and the town in general,
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important. I think there's so much to learn from that you guys kind of are in one of maybe the most contentious places in County Down to have a parade, you were saying, and it's very impressive that you've been able to maintain that to such a high standard for so many years. I think there is definitely something to learn from the coordination and the cooperation that you have really kind of sought to have with the local community. In terms of, you were talking a wee bit about respect, about kind of the role models in your band growing up, the young men who mentored you and who were positive influences. Do you think that that's something that maybe young men are missing now that bands can offer to them?
I think it was without a doubt. Like, it's one of the aspects that bands definitely can. You look up. Years ago, I was looking up to people. Now there's people looking up to me. But the good thing is about the young. We've handed the most of the reins of the running of the band over to younger guys, and girls, and with a big diverse community of people in the band, and but they still asked me to be chairman, just to run my eyes over anything before they do anything, and that's what I maintain and keep saying to them all the time. Before you make any decision with a wee WhatsApp group, before you put anything on WhatsApp, stop and think. Mm-hmm. Is this the right thing to put on? Is it going to negatively impact on somebody? Is it going to annoy somebody? You've got to be so careful nowadays, And fortunately, that's the direction we're putting people in, and I think most of them are pretty good that way. They're following the lead we're giving them,
Fantastic. I mean, you're obviously doing something right if you've been on the road for 50 years, but I'm sure there have been enormous challenges throughout that time, those 5 decades. What would you say have been some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a band, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, well, there was one of the biggest ones was one of the first ones, really. We had one of our members, now with a photograph. My mother was great for keeping photographs of the bands, and she had a great photograph, always was up on our wall. And it was one of the first colour photographs I think we have. And at that time I was in the side drum. And the fella next to me was a guy called Ricky Wilson. He was from Newcastle, a wee bit older than me. And then the fella on the outside was Jeffrey Carlisle, one of the very founding members, So 3 of us were in the side drum. And this photograph's funny because I always struggled to carry the side drum because I sort of rolled around on my leg all the time. And you can see it clearly on the photograph, The sad thing now is that I'm the only one of those guys remaining. So Jeffrey was sadly lost at sea in a tragic accident, That was a big blow to the band at the time because he had been one of the founder members. He would have been one of the, let's put it, one of the stricter members. You know, if he had a point to make, he made it, you know, and it didn't matter who it offended. And that was the type of Jeffrey, just a sort of him, he couldn't avoid it, you know. Ricky was killed in a landmine explosion. So he was in the UDR, you know, and he was killed in 1980. And that was a massive challenge to the band too, you know. It was a big shock to us all, you know, and it really hit home in a big way, you know. And we always tried to remember Ricky in particular, you know. So we had a bass drum, you know, produced in his memory, and we carry a standard now with his name and details on it. We always have carried that. No matter where we go, we always carry that. The family was all great supporters of the band. And it was a big challenge, you know. We've had a number of other challenges. We've had a couple of members deceased through tragic circumstances, you know. And, you know, the sign outside of the building here, it says it's good to talk, you know, and that's one of the messages we try to get across. I always try to encourage, as chairman of the band, we have a lot of younger people, with young girls, young fellas, you know, with older people and all. And, you know, you go to committee meetings or you go to band meetings or AGMs, you get a lot of people and you know they've got an opinion, but they won't speak it, you know. So I always reach out to everybody and say, look, if you have an opinion and you're not sure about voicing it, just give it to me and I'll voice it on your behalf. Because I know some great ideas, some opinions. You've got to make sure you have everybody encapsulated in it, you know. So, you know, it's a challenge, you know, to make sure everybody's heard. And as I say to members, it doesn't matter why you're in the band 20 years or I'm in the band 50 years. If somebody's joined the band this year, they've got an equal say. You know, they might have better opinions than me, but they've still got an equal say. And nowadays, with the challenges we have, you know, with, you know, girls and fellas and all these things, you've got to be very, very careful how you handle it. So they've been a lot of challenges and we've had to learn quickly, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a huge thing about learning, adapting, and really the band has its roots in that, doesn't it? In adapting and becoming something different and something new. What about that kind of switch financially? Even how did you all scrape together the money that you would need to get a fresh band on the road?
In the early days, obviously, we inherited the old uniform, but it wasn't nothing to write home about. It was a white shirt and a pair of black trousers and a pig cap. Our first full uniform were white jumpers. Now, we were very, very fortunate. At the time, we had a member of the lodge and who had been a member of the original band, Tom Bingham. Tom Bingham had two draper shops, one in Castlewell and one in Newcastle. So he was the ideal candidate for getting us jumpers. So Tom in those days had a series of housewives all over the country who done sewing and all these types of things in the spare time to make a few pounds. So Tom was on the ball and got us the white jumpers. We had purple dicky bows, black trousers and a red stripe down the side. And they done us for a lot of years, you know. And Michael, for many years, his loft was near coming down with so many white jumpers, you know. But that was the first uniform. The fundraising in those days, you would hardly hear tell of it now, was a sponsored walk. Wow. Would have done a sponsored walk up in Tullymore Park or somewhere and would have raised a few pounds. But in those days, you were raising, you know, 300 or 400 quid, like, but obviously things were a lot cheaper. But because we were all young, we couldn't really contribute. So things were kept to a bare minimum. The biggest outlay we had was, and I'll take probably a lot of responsibility for this, we had sort of like a semi-lambeg drum. They were popular in the late 70s and early 80s. So Billy Hewitt and Sandy Rowe made these lambeg drums. They weren't the full lambeg drums, but they had goat skin heads. So I was on the bass drum then, obviously, and I was probably a bit fitter and stronger than I am now. But we periodically, quite often, bust the heads. So Michael was only one of the only men that had a car. So on a Friday night parade, we'd bust the head, or maybe two heads. We hadn't the wherewithal to replace them ourselves. So Michael was away on a Saturday morning with the bass drum on the roof rack of the car, down to Billy Hewitt's to get new heads put in, you know. But say money was tight in those days, you know, and you just had to live off the bare means, you know.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that Blood and Thunder tradition. I mean, you've already touched on it earlier, but what was it that kind of drew you to that? What is it that you enjoy about Blood and Thunder bands? Just
to start, if my father would have had his way, I would have been in the Crimson Aura Brian Brew Pipe Band in Newcastle. He was a member of it. He played the bass drum. My oldest brother's in it. And I would assume he had pursued me and my younger brother would stream that way. But once we got the Blood and Thunder bug, that was it. But in those days, anybody that's involved in the Blood and Thunder's bands in the early 70s could tell you it was a lot different than it is now. You know, the Troubles was in full flight. We were doing the best we could with practice and stuff. We probably weren't the most accomplished players. We admit that, you know. But we managed okay, you know. And there was a lot of resistance, believe it. You know, there really was a lot of resistance from older members within our own community. A lot of them seen, you know, these Blood and Thunder bands are poaching all the young fellas. The pipe bands, the accordion bands, the silver bands are not getting members. So I'd assume that was some of it, you know. But we persevered anyway. But, you know, the band scene has totally transformed. And you can see the gradual increase, you know, from the 80s, early 80s, right through to the 90s. The change in the band performance is unreal. Like, you know, different types of flutes, different types of styles of play. You know, one example we had was when we first started, 50-odd members from our band became the roots of the Young Loyalists in Castlewell. Now, lots of our listeners will know the UIL in Castlewell. So lots of their members started in our band. We take great pride that we learned them, you see, how to flute, you know. They wouldn't admit that, but we would say that. They were great rivals of ours, and they're obviously old friends. We all went to school, but they were always great rivals of ours. They were in the style of a wee band from Belfast here in the East Belfast called Sharpshooters. A lot of the listeners will know Sharpshooters. They were a bit ahead of their time. And the UAL and Castlewell were a similar type of band. So they played a different style than us. We stuck purely to the Blood and Thunder and the basic, you know, the loyal tunes and stuff. But over the years, things have developed. We got into a wee bit of sort of verging on the melody, where we started to play a few marches and stuff. And we done quite well at it. But it was more challenging for the members, particularly the flautist. They had to put a bit more effort into learning it. And Michael was the main tutor. And he was a bit of a hard taskmaster, Michael, you know. So he made sure you had to be at practice, and he made sure you were learning, you know, as you went along. But over the years, we've drifted away from that back to the pure Blood and Thunder. But if you're listening to Blood and Thunder bands now, like, it's absolutely amazing now, you know. If you look at some of the bands, and the standard of play now is absolutely fantastic. You know what I mean? I was listening to, there was an event there last weekend, I think it was, Maghera had an indoor event. And they had a wide range of melody bands and Blood and Thunder bands. And like the first band I seen on the YouTube was Ballykeel, right round Ballymena direction. It was stunning. The performance they put in was absolutely unbelievable. Then, you know, you get the like Imperial Corps and you get all these bands. It's fantastic. Really is fantastic, you know.
So coming back to that 50th anniversary, obviously that's kind of what we're celebrating tonight, isn't it? Talking about the band, 50 years on the road. How do you sustain something like this for 50 years?
Yeah, it's personally speaking, I think it's you need the right leadership in the band, you know, and you've got to, you know, you've got to make a lot of compromises as well along the way, you know. We've had difficult years. We had a period where we were really struggling to get the band out. Those nights we were out with 6, 7 flutes. It was pretty low. Many's a night you said, I wonder why we'll bother. But as soon as you stop going out, you've had it, you know, the band's going to dissolve. So we kept sticking at it, and we kept sticking at it. One of the difficulties you have, we were getting that a little bit older, you know, and it's harder. I always find, no matter what organisation you're in, it's harder for old people to get young people into a band. And it doesn't matter what the organisation is. Young people bring young people. So we're fortunate we got a group of young fellas to join the band. And they brought their mates, and their mates brought mates. And we were able to revive the band. We made a real conscious effort, and we put a massive effort into fundraising to get ourselves a full dress uniform. That was the whole works like. All the one colour, the trousers, the jackets, the hats, the whole lot. And once you get a new uniform and new instruments, it seems to draw people and your performance starts to go up. So we drew more and more members in, and we got ourselves built up again. And we got a real good bunch that had a real interest in the band, had been brought up the right way in the band, and they are very, very keen to keep the band going. And lots of them members are now in the band 15, 20 years. And they're the real core now, you know, that's going to carry the band forward. But you've got to stick at it, and you've got to, you know, there's good times and bad times. And you've got to listen to the members, you know. You can't, you know, 3 or 4 people can't run a band and do it all their way. In the early days, that was fine. We were all young, wee bit subservient. We done what we're told. But it's not as easy now with young people. Young people have changed. So you've got to take all the views on board and try and carry as many of those views forward and do what's best for the band as a whole, you know.
Yeah. And do you think that style of cooperation is better or worse thing for the band?
Oh, I think it's better. It's definitely better. There's times, sometimes you go to a committee meeting there and you say to yourself, oh, it was easy in the old days, you know. There's so many views come, but it's good, like, you know, some of the views are good. We can't think of all the you know, people's better ideas than me. And we found that this last few years, because the young people in the band now are very enthusiastic about getting out. They want out every night of the week. I was like that when I was young. Now you've got a full-time job and a family, grandchildren, you know, you've got all demands on your time. But the young folks are able to go on their own, you know.
Yeah. So, Kenny, 50 years, how are we celebrating?
Well, we've had a big year. Obviously a fantastic year. So it was, our first goal was to get 50 bands on our band parade in August. So we set out early and we decided then we would attend physically as many parades as we could go to. Well, a big year last year for parades, but this year we really hit it in the nose, like. And say we had an indoor event last Friday night, and that was number 51 outing this year for us. So wide range of events from parades to orange.
You're ready for the season to be over?
We're ready for the season to be over and take a bit of a break and get a deep breath before we hit for the future. Big things ahead of us now is a new uniform.
Okay. So
we've spent quite a bit of time consulting on what we'd like, and we had a WhatsApp poll. There's a bit of a danger with these WhatsApp polls, you know, and I sort of seen it coming. So some of the folks in the band would like the shirt, the trousers, and a nice new hat. And there's another group of people that would like the full-blown uniform, you know, the full dress jacket. So we decided we'd have a poll. We'll see where we went. So I think we had about 48 or 49 responses. And we had 24 wanted the full uniform and 23 wanted the shirts, you know. So where do you go with that? Like, so as chairman, I made the decision, we're going for the whole lot. That means you get the jacket, the shirt, the trousers, and the hat, you know. So set ourselves that target. We've had a guy down with ideas on colours, design, and all that. So I had a guy down that's good at all this stuff, drew us up a few samples, and we've now got it with a guy on the Sandy Road that does the uniforms, and he's making us a few real life samples and see where we're at. But definitely a new uniform next year. I've also dropped a wee note to the folks in the band to say, look, we've talked about this before, it's never happened. I would like to take the band to the battlefields in France and Belgium. Fantastic. And we're focusing on 2027. Mm-hmm. Now, this would be a real shout back to the early days of the band, because we had a member in the band, now he's in the photograph in 1912. So he joined up with the Royal Irish Rifles, and he was killed at Messines in August 1917. So that would be a nice to go there as the modern day band and visit his, you know, resting place. Like, so that's one of the big goals we have. Obviously, we want to increase the membership, and with people out there, we've a bit of a problem. Colour party, we could sell colour party people to bands, you know, but we're really wanting to increase the flute corps and the drum corps. I would like to see a couple of boys coming on to take the bass drum. There's me and an guy does the bass drum, and 50 years in it, you know. I still like doing it. Like,
we break every once in a while.
We break every once in a while. So we've a good the two of us are doing well at the minute, but I'd like to see somebody else coming on. We've had one or two people over the years. I'd love to do the bass drum. No problem. Come ahead. One guy that was particularly good, and he says to me after a few nights at the parade, Kenny, I think I'll go back on the flute, you know.
I can't hack it, Kenny.
A lot harder, you know. But they don't know to pace themselves, you see. I learned over 50 years, you pace yourself, you know. But yeah, so there's big things ahead, say the membership and also a big thing, you know. We've a few fundraising events coming up, and we'll try to make we don't want the band to be a financial burden to anybody, you know. So we'll try and get as much fundraising as possible. But all these things cost money. Absolutely. Uniforms, you could be £700 or £800 a pop, you know. And a trip to the Somme, obviously, you know, would be dear, like, too. But we're in the early stages of planning that, and I can see no reason why. We've been in Scotland 2 years in a row. Mm-hmm. We'd love to go back to Scotland. Unfortunately, this coming year, it falls at a bad time. So the Scottish 12th sort of on the Saturday, and then our 12th on the Monday, so it doesn't really work out. But I would like to take the band. Now, we've had an offer of going to London for the Lord Garrison Memorial Parade. Not sure why we're going to be able to take that up this year, but definitely would like to do some other parade in the mainland next year. So I know there's different parades take place in England and stuff and up in Scotland, but we'll see how it goes. But plenty of things in the future, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. In terms of that battlefield trip, what's that looking like? Is there much planning going on? Are there particular places that you want to go and things you want to do?
Yeah, it's early stages now. As I said to you earlier, so not I'm trying to blow my head out of the water or anything, but I have actually produced a book on the First World War on our local area. So it's another story on its own, you know.
Tell us a wee bit about
Well, I'll tell you the story. Well, you know, I attend a parish church there in Kilmagan. It's between Newcastle, Dundrum, Castlewellan.
Well,
yeah. So sitting in there one day, and I actually had been to the Somme with the Grand Orange Lodge trip. It was for the 90th anniversary of the Battle of Somme. We're over. And that sort of got me sparked and thinking. I was sitting in church one day and there was a massive, big, lovely, big war memorial, you know, and all these names on it. And I happened to say to one of the elderly parishioners, you know, he was my ex-headmaster. And I says, Ken, who is all them men up on that there, you know? He says, I'll be honest with you, I have no idea, but I know a man you should ask. So this was a man in Dundrum who was a real historian. Went down, visited him, and I told him the story, you know. And he says to me, well, Kenny, if you've an interest in it, call up some night and I'll give you the SP and all this, you know. So I chatted to him and he gave me a lot of details who to ask, and I got a bit more information. That really sparked my interest. And then I thought about Castlewellan and I thought about Newcastle. So I went and visited people there. Unfortunately, all these men are now passed, and I'm glad I did. And one particular man said to me, he lived in Castlewellan, Tom Edger, was a real wealth of knowledge. He says to me, Kenny, if I was your age, I always wanted to write a book on this. Why don't you write a book about all these men? I says, they did a good job getting me to finish school, let alone write a book. Oh, no problem, don't worry, you'll be able to do it all right, you know. So it started from there, and I done all the research, got all the names. Internet's a brilliant thing now. Spoke to people, the relatives and all that. End of the day, I produced a book. And launched it in 2018. Was the 100th anniversary, the finish of the war. Had a night in Dundrum at the parochial hall, like, you know. I was absolutely packed. I done a bit of a talk. I was absolutely blown out of the water. I had 400 copies, and I sold the whole 400 copies. Now, it was never a cost-making thing, you know, money-making thing. 400 copies. I've done several talks in different places for people, you know. And so I've always had that interest. I've seen lots of bands visiting the battlefields. So obviously I'd want to go to the Somme, the 1st of July. It'd be nice to do the parade down from Thiepval Village down to the Ulster Tower. Men and Yates, and obviously
privileged to do that. I have to say, it's you can't miss it. It's fantastic. So
Men and Yates, a big one, you know. They'd love to do it now. So myself and two mates, we've went regularly this last 5-6 years, done our own thing, you know, and took a car and hired car and seen all around. So there's lots of sites we'd let people see, and it's great for the young people. I would have to go up and visit the grave of this young man, Richard O'Brien, who was in the band, and he's up around Messines there, you know, so we'll go up and visit his grave, you know. But it's, you know, some of the guys out of the band had been there, but lots of them would like to go. But unfortunately, they would have to finance this one themselves, you know.
Yeah. Wow, what a special way to mark 50 years with that kind of goal in the future. Anything else moving forward that you want to do with the band? I know you've already talked a little bit about handing down the reins and what comes next.
So we've a lot of the day-to-day run of the bands. We've got 3 or 4 key individuals, young fellas, that are really doing exceptionally well, you know. Need checked in odd time, but they're doing pretty good. Fundraising, they're fantastic. They have raised more money in the last 2-3 years than we raised in 30 years. Wow. You know, and they're very, very keen. Some of the girls that have come board in the colour party, 2 girls in particular, they have organised last year in particular, that we've done a Friday, you know, a Friday, one of them, and fantastic fundraiser. We had a couple of band indoors, we've had quizzes, all these different things, you know, so they're all working well together, and so we want to encourage that, and eventually we want to hand over the chairmanship to some of them, you know.
There you go. That'll be a big task, big shoes to fill. Yeah,
big shoes. Well, I don't know, you know, but yeah, no. So we'd like to, we want to keep the older members in, you know. We're fortunate enough we're able to bring some back, you know. Some come back when they've seen the band going well. But 2 guys joined this year, and they're nearly as old as me, you know.
It's fantastic to have that mix. I know you said earlier about what a diverse range of people you have in the band, and there's very few pastimes that people do where you've got that kind of diversity.
There's very little like that, as you say, you know, and people, you know, throughout our local community, we're well recognised. You know, didn't mention it before, during COVID, we stepped up and we helped with fundraising and food parcels, and we give them, so it didn't matter who you were, what side of the community where you got them, you know. So we thought it was a good thing to do, you know. And yeah, the band's been, and we're, anytime there's a district parade needed or a band needed for a district event, we're normally the go-to band. So it says it's good, you know.
It's a very, very special thing that you have going. Thank you so much, Kenny, for your time tonight. Huge congratulations to the band on 50 years and every success in the future.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Come back next time. And until then, take care of yourselves.